Welcome, welcome, come on in. The show's about to begin. Grab your seat and feel the nostalgia grow. Sit tight, relax, and enjoy the ride. We're so glad you're here. Let's go. It's time for Let's Play with AppleMatt.
Folks in Tombstone always had an eye for culture. In its time, some of the most famous theater companies in America marched through the famous Shefflin Opera House. Why, Nellie Boyd herself appeared in a play called The Banker's Daughter. After that, pretty near every touring company in America made a stop in Tombstone. This is our little town's recreation of Shefflin Hall, Tombstone's quality opera house. That's where Wyatt and Morgan Earp saw a play called Stolen Kisses, the night that Morgan's life would be stolen by a gunman. But beyond that, Shefflin Hall was the largest and best-known theater between El Paso, Texas, and San Francisco. It put on legitimate plays, musicals, opry, and lectures. Plus, it was the biggest adobe building of any type in the country. So, as our saying went, other than that little shooting, Mrs. Earp, what did you think of the theater? Let me tell you a story about what folks around here call the actor's mind. Silver fever was contagious. No one was immune, not even actors. But actors ain't minors, and they proved to be easy marks for con artists. James O'Neill, father of the playwright Eugene O'Neill, was one such victim. He ran into a swindler named George Chaprico, who sold him and a couple of other actors shares in a claim called the Cumberland Mine. After they lost their savings and went bankrupt, folks around here called it the actor's mine. Sometimes the Opera House was used to raise money for a good cause. After the town fire of June 22nd, 1881, a bunch of local actors put on a play, charging $1 per person. In 2 nights, they raised over $800. The money was used to buy a fire alarm bell in the event that there was another fire, which there was. This here opera house is named after Ed Shefflin, who pretty much founded the town of Tombstone. Now, old Ed was a stubborn one. One old pioneer called him the queerest specimen of humanity ever seen. Folks told him that the only things he'd ever find in southwestern Arizona would be scorpions, Apaches, and his tombstone. But old Ed proved them all wrong. After prospecting for a few years, he hit the richest lodes of silver in Arizona and named them Graveyard and, you guessed it, Tombstone. This here is the Oriental Saloon. Now this place you might want to spend some time. Wyatt Earp surely did. While he was Deputy U.S. Marshal, he was also owner of a quarter of the gambling action around here. And he spent so much time at the Oriental running card games and whatnot that this was practically his office. Now, that was actually a fairly common arrangement for lawmen in the Old West, and you might wonder why. Well, here's the answer. Gambling operations in Western saloons were routinely rigged in the house's favor. To keep a lid on everything, patrons were requested to check their sidearms at the door, unless, of course, they were wearing a badge, in which case an exception was made. So, although being deputized didn't necessarily get you a big salary or much glory, it did bring perks, like letting you be the only rascal in the house holding a law book by your side. And if you were also the one dealing the cards, that little 6-gun tended to make the other players a mite less inclined to question your calls. Well, the marshal may be out of the office just now, but while you're waiting, take a look around. Perhaps the most unlikely poker game in Western history took place at this table. In the wee small hours of October 26, 1881, Tom McLaury, Ike Clanton, and Morgan Earp all sat down to enjoy each other's company for several hours. Yet, just a few hours later, the three would face off over at the OK Corral. And there, Morgan would shoot Ike's brother Billy dead, and the Earp's friend, Doc Holliday, would kill Tom equally dead. Too bad they couldn't have just worked it all out at the poker table. Perhaps the most unlikely poker game. Nice setup, huh? Problem was, all this nice glass and marble and woodwork was highly vulnerable to stray gunshots from the street. So, the saloon keepers were careful to set their bars back a good 20 feet from the doorway. That's also the reason Wyatt Earp and Sheriff Johnny Behan were said never to stand in an open doorway or by a window while fulfilling their semi-official duties here at the saloon. The beer in this barrel came fresh from a local brewery. That wasn't because the saloon keepers were snobs. It was because the heavy beer kegs cost too much to ship over long distances. In fact, a brewery often started its own saloon. In Tombstone, that's how Wyatt's little hangout here came to have its equally fancy competitor, the Crystal Palace. A lot of money passed into and out of this register. A friendly saloon keeper would cash a check or a banknote for you or let you run up a bar tab on credit. Saloons also functioned kind of like convenience stores. They'd sell you cigars, headache powders, or candies. Them candies, some men had the nerve to call wife pacifiers. Now imagine, if your husband had just spent a whole night and a whole week's wages drinking at a saloon, do you think you'd be pacified by a few candies? The beer in this barrel. This door led out to the lodgings of our town's ladies of the evening, also known as our soiled doves or fallen angels. These ladies would hang out in the saloons, dancing with the fellas and convincing them to buy more drinks, from which the gals got a percentage of the profits. Some of the more enterprising hug girls did further business up in their rooms in what was known as the Red Light District. That phrase actually came from Wyatt's adopted home of Dodge City. It derived from the railway men who'd leave their red brakeman's lantern hanging outside the door of the woman they were staying with to discourage intruders. By the way, Big Nose Kate, elder, Doc Holliday's girlfriend, supposedly opened the first cat house in Tombstone just shortly after arriving. On occasions when a card game or personal dispute got too heated, you could just shut down this pot-belly stove. But of course, after Wyatt left Tombstone and became a saloon keeper in his own right in Alaska, well, he probably kept the stove in that there saloon burning most of the time, considering how cold it would get up there. This being one of our town's fancy saloons, you could be fairly sure that the drink you were served in this shot glass had not been watered down. If you know about the West from moving pictures, you know that the bad guys always wore black hats. So, this hat must be either Ike Clanton's or Tom McLaury's. Although then again, I seem to recall that Morgan Earp and his brothers usually wore hats just like this one. According to legend, Wyatt Earp, during his very first visit here at the Oriental Saloon, led a troublesome tough guy out by the ear. Supposedly, that's how Wyatt acquired his quarter interest in this nightly game of faro. Faro, played with cards like these, was a fast-moving betting game that was highly popular in the West. Many Westerners felt that derby hats like this were pretentious. On Tombstone's Allen Street, which was the town's saloon district, wearing a derby was actually considered an invitation to a fight. Someone would promptly knock the thing off your head, at which point everyone else around would help kick the life out of it. Now, if you were found to be an actual dude, which is what they called a fresh arrival from the East, your assailants would then chip in and buy you a regulation soft cowboy hat. But if you were a local, forget it. It was assumed that you should have known better and that you were ready to fight rather than switch hats. There's nobody in right now. Sorry, partner. Partner, a silver dollar is yours, if you can answer my question right. This here's the Can Restaurant, named after the one in Tombstone. It claimed to be named after the famous Can dance hall over yonder in Gay Paris. Its menu boasted of serving deer, antelope, and even bear meat, plus lobsters and fish, imported by fast stagecoach from the coast of Mexico. Of course, some locals said that the name came from the fact that everything in the menu actually came out of a can. Most Old West families were stretched to the limit, paying for food and other necessities, so dining out was a rare extravagance. But for a town's other folk, from bachelors and miners to visiting Easterners, a typical Western town would have a variety of restaurants to satisfy their hunger as well as their budget. Of course, you modern folks might be a little shocked when you take a look at the prices way back in Wyatt's day. What? You say you'd like a sirloin steak with a side of hot rolls? 25 cents, please. If you look through these windows, you might see Wyatt Earp and his lady-love Josephine Marcus sharing a romantic dinner. The food they'd have eaten was probably cooked in a cast-iron stove, fueled by the roots of the mesquite bush. It burned almost as hot as coal, but it didn't have to be imported from the East. Yep, Wyatt was so smitten that he'd take Josie out on the town, apparently forgetting about Manny Blaylock, his common-law wife, waiting for him back home. And likewise, Josie seemed to have a bit of amnesia about her fiancé, Sheriff John Behan. The upstairs may have been the residence of restaurant owner Quan Key and his famous wife Ah Lum, otherwise known as China Mary. It was said China Mary was a powerful leader among the 500 or so Chinese residents in Tombstone's Chinatown. Many depended on her character testimony to get a good job. Prejudice against immigrants made a restaurant one of the few places a Chinese man could find work, since the Chinese weren't even allowed to work in the Tombstone mines. So, after they worked so hard building the Transcontinental Railroad, a lot of Chinese had no choice but to do so-called women's work, like cooking and laundry. How's that for gratitude? This here's the laundry. Now, miners and cowboys would drop their clothing off here when it had gotten stiff with dust from the mines or the plains. Now, even if he didn't have enough clothes to dust a fiddle, your typical Western guy would have been firm set against doing his own washing. And this created a clean new business opportunity for Western gals who were willing to boil and iron them guys' duds. It was also an opportunity open to the Chinese, like the proprietor of this here laundry, who were locked out of the more lucrative work in the ranches and the mines. Just before the Civil War, a freed slave from Kentucky named Clara Brown set herself up as a laundress with a tub like this in Aurora, Colorado. With the money she made, she invested in real estate. Within a few years, she'd saved up over $10,000. Quite a businesswoman. She used the money to help other former slaves get settled in Colorado and to track down her daughter, who'd been sold away from her. This table saw a lot of elbow grease, mixed with just plain frontier grit. The industrious Chinese, who came to America to seek their fortune beside the other immigrants, had a much tougher time than the Europeans. Their culture and language were different, and that made them a target for ill treatment. Even though they helped build the railroad and mine for gold, many of them had to settle for the more menial jobs. Out west, many of the Chinese ran laundries. The work was hard. There was no plumbing, so they had to haul water. They'd boil the clothing in soap made of animal fat or beeswax, often adding bluing, lye, ammonia, or borax. After the laundry dried, they'd iron the pieces on a table like this, using irons that weighed anywhere from a 4-pound small iron to a 17-pound charcoal family iron.
During the California gold rush, miners complained that the local laundries were too expensive. So, some enterprising Chinese began shipping laundry from San Francisco back to China. You wash there. Now, this was cheaper, but you might wonder how they kept track of which duds were whose. In fact, since this round-trip cruise took several months, you might wonder what them miners wore in between. Well, partner, there's some things even I don't know.
Chinese launderers and frontier homemakers both used washboards for the smaller items of clothing that didn't need boiling to clean them. Back then, you could find a washboard for 12 to 20 cents each. They were made of a hardwood frame with a heavy zinc scrubbing surface. Clothing was soaked in water and then rubbed against the ridges until it became clean.